So today I have a message for the Amish, the Mennonites, and the Hutterites. Of course, Amish Mennonite is the same thing. Now, those of you who've been following my YouTube videos know by now where I stand between Christians and the Jews. And if you don't know, all you have to do is take a look. And the reason I wear the yellow star and the yellow clothing of shame is in solidarity with the Jews throughout the Middle Ages who were persecuted mercilessly, raped, pillaged, and murdered at the hands of Christians in the name of Jesus or Jesus. So what I want to do here is first go to Revelation 14, verse 11. I'll start in actually verse 6. This is at the point of the three angels and Babylon's fall in Revelation 14. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel. Do you know what the everlasting gospel is? The everlasting gospel is written in Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34, and in Hebrews 8, verses 8 through 12, and even more descriptively in Romans 11, verses 25 through 27. If you don't get the one in Jeremiah, if you don't get the one in Hebrews, you should be able to understand the one in Romans 11, verses 25 through 27. And that being, let's see if I can memorize this. Well, I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the time of the Gentiles comes to the full or comes to an end. And so all Israel shall be saved, for out of Zion, not out of Rome, shall come the deliverer, and shall turn ungodliness from Jacob, for this is my covenant with them. What covenant? The everlasting covenant, the new covenant that is written in Jeremiah 31, verses 31 to 34, and Hebrews 8, verses 8 through 12. That is the new covenant. That is the everlasting covenant. Okay? For this is my new covenant with them when I shall take away their sins. Okay? All right. So this angel has the everlasting covenant, and he's preaching it. What's it about then? What is the everlasting covenant? We just read it. We just talked about it, right? It's about the salvation of all Israel. Having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them. Gospel means good news. The new covenant is the good news. And unto them that dwell on the land, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, fear Jehovah, and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come. And worship him that made heaven and earth, and the sea, and the fountains of water. And there followed another angel, saying, announcing the impending destruction of Babylon, which today the last Babylon to be destroyed is, in fact, Rome and all her sister cities. Is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations to drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if any man worship the beast, give reverence to that guy at Rome, or over there in Constantinople, or in the guy who calls himself Patriarch, what's Bartholomew one? He's another one of them. And his image, that's that graven image that people have in their Sunday services. Okay? So that's two of them. And then it says, and receive or take his mark in his forehead or in his hand. On Ash Wednesday, where they go and do that mark on their forehead. Or when they pray, they do this little ritual with their hand, you see. The same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of Jehovah, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels, in the presence of the Lamb, and the smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever. And they have no rest day nor night who worship the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. Now, so here's what it says. Here is the patience of the saints, that's the Jews. This is the vengeance on behalf of the Jews, but not only that. Not only them, not only the Jews, but also they that keep the commandments of Jehovah and have the faith of Yeshua Messiah. Now, those of you among the Hutterites, the Amish Mennonite, and most of the Mennonite community, I hope most of the Mennonite community, at least the community that I'm nearby, they do not reverence the man at the Vatican. They do not have a graven image in their church services. And they do not put a mark on their forehead on Ash Wednesday, or make the same mark with their hand when they pray. Does that mean you're excluded, you Amish, you Mennonites, and you Hutterites, from this curse? Well, take a look at it. You tell me what you think. Give me your opinion. If you don't do those things, then that curse doesn't fall upon you. Ever thought about that? Those three things. Okay. Now, here's what those Jews have been patiently waiting for, and also those who keep the commandments of Jehovah and the faith of Yehoshua. Now, let me show you something, folks. I was looking for a particular article that would cover just about everything that I wanted to talk about today. And as I said, this is a message of hope and encouragement to the Amish Mennonite, the Mennonite, and the Hutterites. So I'm going to read an article, and the first part of it is a bit boring and a bit tedious, and please do not just fall asleep or quit this video because of that, because I believe it's very important. A woman by the name of Linda Watson took a lot of time and effort, painstaking effort, to put this together, and it will help you to see where you came from. Okay, so the link is 12tribehistory.com/pilgrims kept the seventh-day Sabbath. Yes, it's true. Many have forgotten this. So she starts with the purpose of this article is this article traces the pilgrims from England to Holland. The pilgrims were persecuted by Queen Elizabeth, that would be Queen Elizabeth I, I think, under a Uniformity Act which required Sunday church attendance. They fled to Holland where they were allowed to worship freely. They joined with the Mennonite church, which was a Seventh-day Sabbath-keeping church. And indeed, the Puritans who did come to the United States, or at least many of them, kept the seventh day. In fact, if you go and read the books by Laura Ingalls Wilder in the beginning, they also kept the seventh day in the beginning. Anyway, she continues, this article proves that pilgrims attended a seventh-day Sabbath-keeping church, and they left England because they were required by law to attend Sunday-keeping churches. They originated from the Brownist or the Separatist. There were three Protestant groups in England starting in the 1600s, the Conformists, which followed the Church of England, the Puritans, which were opposed to many of the teaching of the Church of England but kept Sunday, and the Separatists, which was started by Robert Brown, many of which kept the Old Testament laws. The Brownist movement. The term Brownist was a common designation for early separatists before 1620. Brownists, independents, and separatists were all used somewhat interchangeably for those nonconformists who broke with the Church of England. Robert Brown was a Puritan Congregationalist leader, one of the original proponents of the separatist or free church movement among nonconformists that demanded separation from the Church of England and freedom of state control. His separatist followers became known as the Brownists. Educated at Corpus Christi College in Cambridge and ordained, he, with Robert Harrison, gathered a separatist church at Norwich in 1580. As a consequence of this and other similar activities, he was imprisoned 32 times and in 1582 was exiled. And this is Encyclopedia Britannica Micropedia, 15th edition, 1990, volume 2, page 562, if you want to go and look that up. But once again, this is not the gist of what I want to talk about. I will continue. In 1582, under the influence of Dutch Mennonites, whose congregation had already existed separately before the Dutch Reformed Church became dominant, Brown published 2 tracts arguing for separation and for congregations with freely entered mutual covenants allowed all members to select a pastor and lay leaders democratically. Who were the pilgrims in England and what churches did they attend? The pilgrims came out of 3 English churches. The first was the Southwark Church. The story begins with John Greenwood. John Greenwood, a clergyman, was ordained at Lincoln in 1582 and served in Lincolnshire from 1582 to 83. Greenwood was arrested in Norfolk and in 1585, probably for preaching without a license. What was that? Probably for preaching without a license. Before I don't want to stray too far away from this particular article, but I'm telling you, you preachers who preach with a state license, you are a ward of the state, and you are no different than the preachers of Europe who persecuted the Jews, because you are a ward of the state. I will continue. Probably for preaching without a license or against the church. Also, all of Britain was required to attend the Church of England. Under the 1559 Act of Uniformity, it was illegal not to attend official Church of England services, which, with a fine of 12d, I don't know what that means, for each missed Sunday and a holy day. The penalties for conducting unofficial services include imprisonment and larger fines. In 1586, he was recognized leader of the London separatists, of whom a considerable number had been imprisoned at various times. In 1586, he and a group of people were sent to jail for refusing to obey the religious laws of Elizabeth I, thus beginning a tradition of religious dissent within Southwark, located in northeast of London. The dissenters founded a prison church, under the guidance of John Greenwood and Henry Barrow, a lawyer. They called themselves Independents, but were also known as Brownists because of the free thinking of Robert Brown, the father of, or the leader, or the founder of the separatist movement. Another clergyman, Francis Johnson, soon joined them, and he had been ordered by the English ambassador to Holland to buy and burn books from Greenwood and Barrow. Inspired by them, he came to visit the authors and found himself being jailed with them. In 1592, Greenwood, Barrow, and John Penry gained a temporary reprieve and began meeting at a house in the borough and formally constituted the Southwark Independent Church. This new congregation was being organized around Francis Johnson as its new pastor and John Greenwood as its teacher. However, the reprieve was short-lived, and Greenwood and Barrow were executed on the 6th of April, 1593. John Penry was also executed at a site near the present-day junction between Albany Road and Old Kent Road on the 29th of May, 1593. Roger Ripon, whose house was used for worship, was arrested and died of disease in prison. 8 imprisoned members of the Johnson Greenwood congregation were released in April 1593. Other congregation members were released in the fall of 1597. These made their way to the former congregation members in Holland. On his release, Francis Johnson finally settled in Holland, where many of the Southwark dissenters had fled to. The remaining members of the group continued to meet in secret before being brought into the open by Henry Jacob in 1616. Jacob had been influenced by the writings of Johnson, and in 1620 some members of the Southwark Church were given permission to sail to America. It was this group who went on the Mayflower. They were a Seventh-day Sabbath-keeping congregation. So now for the Gainsborough congregation. Between 1605 and 07, Richard Clifton had attempted to establish an independent or separatist congregation in the Gainsborough, England area. He joined ranks with Thomas Helwys. During the 1607, John Smith was visiting Thomas Helwys, the elder of the Scrooby separatist congregation located 12 miles from Gainsborough. Smith, a former clergyman, or Smythe, from Lincoln, had been living in the area. Smythe was soon elected as a new pastor of the Gainsborough-on-Trent congregation, with Thomas Helwys as its elder. A decision was soon made to move both congregations to Holland for safety. Where I lost my place. The Gainsborough congregation under Smythe and Helwys would depart first, and the Scrooby congregation would follow shortly later. Members of a Brownist church at Gainsborough went over in 1607 to Holland. They left behind a few scattered friends at Scrooby, 12 miles at the west of Gainsborough, in the hundred of Basset Lowy in Nottinghamshire, England. So now for the Scrooby congregation. In 1608, Johnson's Amsterdam congregation was invaded briefly by an influx of another Barrowist congregation from Gainsborough-on-Trent under the leadership of John Smythe, a former clergyman and university friend of Johnson. Some 125 members did arrive in Amsterdam during 1608 in dribbles and drabs, and by late 1608, most of the Scrooby congregation had arrived. This is in Encyclopedia Britannica, Micropedia, 15th edition, 1990, volume 10, pages 114 I assumed they mean through 115. Now for John Robinson. In 1602, Robinson became a curate at St. Andrew's Church, Norwich. His refusal to conform the Anglican to the Anglican anti-Puritanism decree of 1604 led to his suspension from preaching, and in 1606 or 1607 he joined the separatist congregation at Scrooby, Nottinghamshire. Also called nonconformists, these early Congregationalists wished to separate from the Church of England so they could follow what they believed to be a purer and more simplified form of church government and worship. With the Scrooby congregation, Robinson traveled to Amsterdam in 1608, but in 1609 he went with other 100 of his followers to Leiden to escape the dissension prevalent among the other nonconformist groups. As pastor at Leiden, he inspired the growth of his congregation to 300 members, one of them William Bradford, who became governor of Plymouth Colony in Massachusetts, likened Robinson's congregations to early Christian churches because of its true piety, humble zeal, fervent love towards, as they say, God. It should read Jehovah and his ways. Robinson entered Leiden University in 1615 to study theology, but in 1617 he and his followers were seeking a more secure and permanent location. In July 1620, while he remained with the majority who were not yet ready to travel, part of his congregation sailed for England aboard the Speedwell. Before departure from Leiden, Robinson declared to them in a celebrated sermon, "For I am confident the Lord has more truth and light yet to break forth out of his holy word." The following September, 35 of them left Plymouth on the Mayflower for New England. Left for, I guess, yes. That's right, because Plymouth is in England. Okay, on the Mayflower for New England. Robinson died before he could reach Holland, and the remnant of his congregation was absorbed by the Dutch Reformed Church in 1658. So you Amish, now you know the reason why you have some English blood in you. Where did it come from? Interesting, huh? Let's continue. And this was Encyclopedia Britannica Micropedia, 15th edition, 1990, volume 10, pages, once again, 114 through 115. John Robinson received a letter from the Dutch government granting him and the Brownists to settle and practice their faith in Leiden, Holland. The Leiden Church, I'll continue because we're getting closer to the Mennonites now. According to the Lenden Museum, Lenden, Lenden, the Pilgrims joined the Mennonite Church. Below is a quote from Lenden Museum. 1609, the Pilgrims arrived from England as refugees. After a short period in Amsterdam, the Pilgrims received official permission to live in Leiden. The city's response declared that Leiden refuses no honest people free entry to come in and live in the city as long as they behave honestly and obey all the laws and ordinances, and under those conditions, the applicant's arrival would be pleasing and welcome. And I suppose this is in the 999/SA300 Missive Book C, FO 126/letter. A letter sent by the city of Leiden to Jans van Beersdorp, members of the provincial committee, provincial executive of the state of Holland, in reply to an undated letter received from him in 1609. Van Beersdorp is asked to hand the Lord Grand Pensionary of Holland the reply of the city of Leiden, together with the request received from John Robinson and some members of the Christian Reformed religion, and a decision taken with regard that the request of February 12, 1609, the city of Leiden declared when a request was received from John Robinson, pastor, and some members of the Christian Reformed religion, all born in England, it was decided to grant permission to them to come and take up residence in Leiden. At the time, the city of Leiden was not aware that the persons in question were members of the sect of the Brownists. The Pilgrims spent 11 years in Leiden, during which time they came into contact with Dutch Mennonites, French Calvinists, and other religious dissenters. In 1620, the Pilgrims set sail for the New World on the Mayflower. The Leiden American Pilgrim Museum was founded in 1997 inside a house dating from and around 1370, which may have sheltered the Pilgrims during their stay in Leiden. Soon after they arrived in Holland, they came under the influence of the Anabaptist teachings through the Mennonites. Smythe's Church in Amsterdam, founded on the principle of adult baptism in 1609, is considered the first truly Baptist church. 2 years later, the congregation split, with part of them remaining in Holland, where they eventually united with the Mennonites, a seventh-day Sabbath-keeping church. Did you hear that, Mennonites? Did you hear that, Amish? How about you, Hutterites? What I'm suggesting is, look where you came from. And remember the scripture that I quoted in Revelation, because it has a lot of bearing on what I'm going to talk about. The Mennonite church descended from the Waldensians. They were Seventh-day Sabbath keepers. Quotes below demonstrate how pilgrims moved to Holland and kept the Old Testament laws. It should read kept the commandments, you see. We read about that, didn't we? Didn't we just read about that? Would you like for me to refresh your memories? Revelation 14 and verse 12. After the condemnation upon those who have the mark of the beast and who honor the beast, the man at the Vatican, he says this: here is the patience of the saints, that's the Jews. Here are they that keep the commandments. What commandments? I'll get to that in just a minute. Of Jehovah and the faith of Yehoshua. Not Jesus, not Jesus, but Yehoshua. Okay. So I've got so many. Yes, here we go. The Anabaptists or Mennonites moved to Holland. Now we have seen that the Baptists, who were formerly called Anabaptists, by the way, not to be confused with the Baptists who call themselves Baptists today. I'll talk about that sometime down the road as well. Were the original Waldensians and have long in the history of the church received the honor of that origin. Let me repeat it. We have now seen that the Baptists, who were formerly called Anabaptists and in later times Mennonites, were the original Waldenses and have long in the history of the church received the honor of that origin. The Mennonites are descended from the tolerably pure evangelical Waldenses, who were driven by persecution into various countries and who, during the latter part of the 13th century, fled into Flanders and into the provinces of Holland and Zeeland. Okay, in Holland, where Anabaptists grew, the Waldenses were held to be the first propagandists of Anabaptist views on Holland soil. Also, some of the oldest Mennonite families in Holland had names of Waldensian origin and claimed to be progeny of such exiled fathers. To speak my mind freely, if their Waldensian opinions and customs were to be examined without prejudice, it would appear that among all the modern sects of Christians, they have the greatest resemblance to that of the Mennonites or Dutch Baptists. This was Limborch, The History of the Inquisition in London, 1731. Bohemia was once the headquarters of these Waldenses, who had been driven from the valleys by persecution. Later, it became the main headquarters for the Swiss Baptists, namely Hutterites and Mennonites. Peter Ruckman, History of the New Testament Church, page 407. They who maintain the Saturday Sabbath to be enforced comply with the Anabaptists. That was Dr. Francis White, Treatise on the Seventh Day, page 132. Now, listen to this, folks. I've mentioned Martin Luther before. I don't have anything good to say about Martin Luther. Martin Luther states, thus, all other religious tendencies act aside of the true doctrine of scriptures as Muhammad of the Turks, the Talmud of the Jews, as also our anti-Baptists and or Anabaptists are among the same. So he lumped them in with the Jews, you see. All forsake and abandon the true works and life God's word requires and urges. Luther goes on to state, the fanatical revilers of the sacrament, namely the Anabaptists, were for all practical purposes indistinguishable from the Jews. There's one more reason why I will wear this. If Martin Luther says that my ancestors are no different from the Jews, then let me wear the yellow star of shame, and let me wear the yellow clothing of shame along with the Jews. For I would rather stand with them than with him. I will continue. Luther writes against Sabbatarians in 1538 and accuses the Anabaptists of circumcision and partaking in Jewish ritual. Luther was less tolerant of the Anabaptists than Jews, since they, the Anabaptists, insinuate themselves upon the church and at the same time refuse to submit to the church's authority. Luther also signed a memo in 1536. Listen carefully, and this is what I'm getting at here. Assessing the death penalty for all Anabaptists, just like he did to the Jews. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of Jehovah and have the testimony of Yehoshua, the Messiah. Do you understand now what I'm saying here? Do you know what I'm getting at? So, who was the enemy of the Jews and those who kept the commandments? You should know by now. All of you who are listening to this should know by now. The Catholics, the Lutherans, and according to my dad, even the Calvinists eventually succumbed. How do you distinguish them? How do you tell the two groups apart? One of them does this. Revelation 14, verse 9, and the third angel followed them and sang with a loud voice, if any man worship the beast, reverence the man at the Vatican. That's what it means. What does worship mean? It is, in the Greek, proskuneo. 4352, to do reverence to. Like kind of like the prime minister today curtsies the Queen of England, that kind of thing. Or bow the knee, same thing. You don't bow to that fella. You don't do any reverence to him whatsoever. If you do, you fall in this category. That's the first category. Let's look at the next category. Okay. And his image. Does the beast have a graven image? Well, there's actually more than one. But the one that is most renowned is the one they call Jesus Christos. You may not worship or do reverence to any graven image whatsoever for any reason. His image, though, is the one they call Jesus Christos. That's the second one. You cannot bow down nor worship. Okay, so the Mennonites, the Amish, and the Hutterites, and I say mostly the Mennonites because some of them have really gone astray. I won't get into that now. So it appears that the Hutterites, the Amish, and the Mennonites passed the first two of that test. So what's number 3? The mark on his forehead or in his hand. The one on Ash Wednesday. Do the Hutterites, the Amish, or the Mennonites put a mark on their forehead on Ash Wednesday? No, they don't. Do they do their little thing like the Catholics do and many of the other and many other Christian religions do, like the Episcopalians and all these other, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Egyptian Orthodox, they all do it, okay? That is the mark that you make with your hand. Is a symbol that you make with your hand. And what the symbol you make with your hand does, it is blasphemy, because what it does is it makes the same mark as you put on your forehead, but it also says that the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit are equals. They are not equals. It is written in the prophets over and over and over again. He is the only one, Jehovah. There is no other besides him. And Yehoshua, the Messiah, the Son, says, my Father is greater than I. Listen, I'll show you. Oh. John 14:28. What does it say? You have heard how I said unto you, I go away and I come back again to you. If you love me, you would rejoice, because I said, I go to the Father, for my Father is greater than I. To claim otherwise is blasphemy and will get you the curse in Revelation 14 and verse 9, 10, 11. That's right. So, the Hutterite, the Amish, and the Mennonite, for the most part, do none of these things. Absolutely none of these things. Are they without fault? No. There's no one without fault. I'm most certainly not without fault. I do not participate. I do not congregate with the Amish Mennonite. I could, but how then would I have learned what I learned now? What I'm trying to do today is, what I'm attempting to do is to give these three groups of people, anyone among them who wants to hear it, how do I put this? Some eye-opening truth. It's a comforting message as well. So, once again, how do you know the difference between these two groups of people? Right? When I say these two groups of people, I'm separating those who worship or who give reverence to the guy at the Vatican or have a graven image or make the mark of his name on their foreheads or with their hand, the right hand. Yes, that's right. They do it with their right hand. Take a look. Watch them. You'll see. All right. Matthew 7, verse 16. You shall know them by their fruits. So Yehoshua, the Messiah, is making an obvious point. By their fruits you shall know them. What is obvious with your own eyes? Okay. Grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor figs from thistles, are they? You see, thorn bushes, they cut you, they stab you, they draw your blood, they injure you. Okay. The Amish, the Mennonite, and the Hutterite, on principle, are pacifists. They will not take up arms to kill another man. Therefore, they are not in the thorn column. You understand what I'm getting at here? Who then was in the thorn column in the Middle Ages in Europe? Who? You should know by now. I shouldn't have to tell you. And if you call yourself one of those, if you call yourself, for instance, if you call yourself a Lutheran, you are a thorn and a briar. And I'm going to tell you what's going to happen to those thorns and briars. Not sure if it's in this one or if I have to search for it. Many times I find myself looking for it. It's right there in front of me. Here. And this is a perfect example. Matthew 7 and verse 15. Beware of false prophets, which do come to you in sheep's clothing. Oh, yes, they did. But inwardly they are ravening wolves. What do ravening wolves do? They kill. They pillage. Rape and murder. You shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? Even so, every good tree brings forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree brings forth evil fruit every single time, I might add. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit. Huh? A good tree cannot be a murderer. A good tree does not rape and pillage. A good tree does not burn people at the stake. Neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Every tree, all right, here it is, folks. Here it is. Every tree that brings not forth good fruit is cut down and cast into the fire. Wherefore, by their fruits you shall know them. So, What is going to happen to these people? Well, here's what I'm getting at. So the people who worship that man or give reverence to the man at the Vatican, or not and, or worship that graven image in their house of worship on Sunday, or make that mark on Ash Wednesday on their forehead and with their hand, they are of that category, because you see the category of the thorns, because this was the tradition of their forefathers. Luther was a murderer. We have written proof right here that Luther was a murderer when he ordered the executions of all Anabaptists. Not only that, he wrote that blasphemous book to the Jews and their lies. So he is a primary example, but not the only example. That man at the Vatican is also. And also the man who calls him, who sits on the throne of the Bartholomew, whatever his name is. Okay. They have all had a history of doing this. So that's why I'm using the example of Martin Luther. So if you call yourself a Lutheran, you approve of Lutheranism. And Lutheranism murdered my forefathers, you see. Now, most of my forefathers were indeed of the Anabaptists, but some of them were also Jews. So, what I'm trying to get to you, Hutterites, Amish, and Anabaptists, when the day comes when Israel's sins are forgiven, and I believe we're right there. When that day comes that Jehovah says, I want all my people back home, many of you, hopefully most of you, will receive visions as written in Joel 2, along with the Jews, the saints. Okay? Here is the patience of the saints, that's the Jews, Revelation 14 and verse 12. And here are they to keep the commandments of Jehovah. Why do the commandments of Jehovah apply? I'll show you. Oh. Matthew 5 and verse 19. Whosoever therefore shall break one of the least of the commandments, the lesser commandments. What are the lesser commandments? The love your neighbor as yourself commandments. And shall teach men to do so, he shall be called least in the kingdom. But whomsoever shall do and teach them shall be called great in the kingdom. You see? Why? Let me explain. Or maybe I should say, let John explain. First John 4 verse 20. If a man say, I love Jehovah, and hates his brother, He is a liar, for he loves not his brother whom he has seen. How can he love Jehovah whom he has not seen? Now, concerning the Sabbath, many of you have heard me say that, how do I put this? The Sabbath that we are looking for is the Sabbath where Israel gets its rest. And that day is the seventh day of Sukkot. That's represented in the seventh day of Sukkot, when Israel gets its rest from Israel's enemies. This is what we're looking for. The Sabbath, the seventh day, is a representation of that. So when the disciples went out to, I'll go to the scripture here. And I will explain why this is so that no one will get confused. Matthew 12 and verse 8 says, "For the Son of Man is also Lord of the Sabbath." All right, we'll start in verse 1. At that time, Yehoshua went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were hungry, and began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. But the Pharisees saw it, and they said unto him, Behold, your disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day. But he said unto them, Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, and that they were with him, how he entered into the house of Jehovah, and did eat the showbread, which was not lawful for them to eat, neither was it for them which were with him, but only for the priests? Or have you not read in the law how that on the Sabbath day the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? But I say to you that in this place is one greater than the temple. But if you had known what this meant, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. Therefore, the Son of Man is master even of the Sabbath day. Now, today, I'm not talking about the folks who kept the Sabbath in the old days. They literally did keep it. I believe they did. But let's be honest, folks, especially those of you with electricity in your houses. Do you keep the Sabbath? Really? No, you don't. Do the Jews in Israel today keep the Sabbath? No, they don't. Is that a condemnation of them? Absolutely not. Does that mean they're not keeping the commandments? No, it does not. Yehoshua said these words: anyone who teaches men to break the lesser commandments, the least of the commandments, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor, the one about your mother and your father, and thou shalt not covet. Those are the lesser commandments. If you keep those commandments, you keep the commandments. Because, now, does that mean idolatry? No, idolatry is wrong, is not okay. It's very clear. It is very clear in Acts when the apostles gave guidelines to the Gentiles in the church that there were 4 things that they were required to do. Do not eat strangled meat. Stay away from bloodshed or any kind of blood. Stay away from fornication, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world, something like that. It's written in Acts. 4 very simple things. That's what was given to the Gentiles. But the lesser commandments apply. They do. But to and force people to observe Sunday at the point of the sword, they always were, and they always will be thorns and briars meant for burning. And then Yehoshua heals on the Sabbath day. Why? Why would he do this? It is a preview of things to come. He deliberately did it. Whether it was going to offend the Pharisees or not made any difference. He deliberately did it for a purpose. Verse 9. And when he had departed there, he went into the synagogue, and behold, there was a man which had his hand withered, and he asked them, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? That they might accuse him. And he said unto them, What man is there among you that shall have one sheep, and if that sheep fall into the pit on the Sabbath day, will not lay a hold of it and lift it out? How much then more is this man better than a sheep? Wherefore? It is lawful to do well on the Sabbath day. And he said to the man, Stretch forth your hand, and he stretched it forth. And it was restored whole, just like the others, just like the other. Then the Pharisees went out and held a council against him that they might destroy him. Why? Because he did a preview of what was going to happen in the Sabbath that we are looking for to come, the time when Israel is given rest from all Israel's enemies. See, that's what it's. The Sabbath is but a shadow of things to come. It is not something that we bury. So, now that Israel, they don't keep the Sabbath, but they recognize the Sabbath. So are they going to be condemned? Nope. Because when that time comes, it is a day of forgiveness. It will be this. Daniel 9, verse 24. To make an end of sin, to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring an everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. It'll be a day of forgiveness of Israel's sins. In that day, you want to be standing with the Jews. You want to be a tree that bears fruit. You do not want to be one of those thorns and briars that it speaks about in Revelation 14, verses 9 through 11. Those are the thorns and the briars. I hope I have made myself abundantly clear about these things. I know here in the next few days, weeks, and months, But I'm going to go straight back to talking about Israel, redemption and salvation of Israel, because I believe something is about to happen. That doesn't mean that I'm right, but I believe something is about to happen. And I'm going to try to stay abreast of the news concerning what's about to happen. And I hope that this video log has been a benefit to somebody.